And we're on. Hey, everybody. Dr. Dusa here with my friend Doug Brignole. We're here for part 2. For those, many of you who joined us I think it was about a week ago, I was a bit of technical problems. In fact, I thought there was a volume interference because I couldn't hear certain things, but afterward I listened and everything sounded great. So yeah. I don't mind me.
By the way, thank you for dressing up and wearing a tie for me today. I appreciate that.
Believe it or not, people think I just sit in a room all day. I actually work. So, yeah.
Oh, darn. I thought you were doing that for me.
No, well, you know,
silly me.
Maybe next time. Maybe it was the only clean stuff I had. But Doug is great. He's a brilliant man. He's done a lot of research and has made a lot of groundbreaking information available for everyone. He's got his new book out, which I actually downloaded. It was PDF originally, and that's when it was the physics of fitness.
Right. Now it's called the physics of resistance exercise. Let me grab a copy.
Yeah, and that's good because that encompasses more people, physical exercise as opposed to just bodybuilding. But everybody is a bodybuilder.
Yeah, the publisher. I'm sorry, the publisher wanted me to. He suggested. Oops, let me get the glare off of there. He suggested that I change it to the resistance exercise. You know, the phonetics of fitness, physics of fitness, right? Sounded good, but fitness is a broad subject. You know, it isn't only biomechanics.
That's correct, right?
And I was just saying a little bit more specific. Yeah.
When you took a walk, I was just alluding to that. But very good book. I mean, I've read through it a couple of times over. It's been you released the PDF, I think, over a year ago, right? Had to be.
I think it was longer than that. I think it was closer to like 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, I fall asleep reading it. Not that it's boring. It's just that I don't bring electronics to bed anymore because it's just.
And you read at the end of the day instead of the beginning of the day, and so yeah, you're tired by that point. Yeah.
I sometimes dream about some of the stuff I read, which is not always good, but in this case,
yeah,
it could be.
You know, I took such a long time, and I was constantly apologizing because the printed version wasn't coming out yet. You know, there was over 900 images in the book.
Yes.
And whenever you publish, you have to make sure that every single photo is copyrighted.
Everything.
So that means you have to either be the photographer, it has to be of good enough quality, or you have to have bought it, or you have to get permission from the photographer, or you have to re-illustrate it, or something so that you own the rights to publish that.
It's a colossal
amount
of work. Colossal.
It's huge.
And you gotta, your mind is like tentacles. You've got to attend to all of that. And you had a publisher who.
Well, they helped me a lot. I mean, they did a lot of the running around for me and tracking down an image. But like, for example, I learned something along the way since I'd never done this quite this way before. One of the lessons from this was when you're writing a book and you want to illustrate a point, you go to Google and you find an anatomy thing and okay, fine, you put it in there, make a note where you got that.
Yeah.
Because the next time they'll say, where'd you get that image? I don't know. You got to make a note of everything. Not to say that you could use it, but you can't even begin asking for permission from the owner of that image unless you can find that image again.
One of the sorry reasons for all of that is once you start to rise in anything that you do and become successful, eyes fall upon you.
Right.
And people want to somehow get their claws into
a piece of the action. Yeah.
Yeah. They either want to sue you or claim something or whatever it might be. But yeah, that's the world. That's the take. And of course, you take risks. You put yourself out there. You know, I've had people threaten me for what I do here.
And people they're not polite.
No.
And they're oftentimes not even well informed.
Wouldn't that be something if they had at least one of those components? You know,
oh my God.
A little bit of redeeming value.
They'll disagree with you, but you can tell by the way they're disagreeing that they're just being contrarian.
No, they're just looking to. Right.
They're not looking for like what's right about what you're saying. They're looking for what might be wrong.
Well, that's because there's no cogent follow-up to whatever they're arguing as far as over what you're talking about.
And by the way, that's the reason why when I wrote the book, and even when I do, you know, any kind of online something, I always try to be thorough. Yes. You know, I try to anticipate the negative comment or the criticism because sometimes if you give a vague answer or a short answer, it's almost worse than no answer at all, because then people have something they think is ammunition, something to criticize.
there's a lot of wiggle room that way. I want to find something I posted yesterday, and it's because you put your info down and you disagreed, and I agreed with your disagreement, but I said something. I can't find it right now, but it was
Is it the thing on the leg raises?
It's not necessary. Oh, do not be strong. I'll just read it.
Yeah, right.
Let me just read it, and then don't be strong. A 300-pound bench. Why? Are you in the NFL, the WWE, the UFC? No need to use all that to actually work the muscles. You've got to decide: are you a mover of weights or a worker of muscles? Look strong. Don't be strong. Strong enough. Too strong. Too strong. Wrecks your joints and it'll give you chronic pain. If you were ever cursed with that, it will literally change your personality. And that's just words I gave to it.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing. And by the way, what you're writing there is kind of at the crux of the misunderstanding. In other words, when you said, look strong,
yes,
it creates the impression that it's just cosmetic.
Correct.
And you cannot make a muscle bigger without making it stronger. You have to load the muscle and challenge the muscle with resistance, and that creates strength. Right? So when you say strong enough, very, very good point. We do want to be strong enough, but there's a misunderstanding that by bench pressing heavy, that the muscles that are participating in that heavy bench press are somehow getting stronger than they would get if you worked each of those participating muscles by itself with maximum effort. And that's absolutely false.
I'll let you continue because your information is supreme, but I think I might have referenced Jerry Brainham last week, and I know you're friends with Jerry. I've had Jerry on, but he said quite some time ago, the question was, can you build hypertrophy by going light? And he said, you've got to go to failure. So that may mean taking a certain amount of weight, which maybe is well, this is just what he said.
Yeah.
He said, but you've got to go to failure, and if you'll get the hypertrophy, the growth, but you really won't engender any better strength.
Well, what's missing from that answer is you can go to failure on a heavyweight, you can go to failure on a lightweight. Right. So going to failure, quote unquote, that doesn't provide enough information. If you train heavy, if you use a weight that barely allows you to get 4 reps, or let me rephrase that. If you use a weight that barely allows you 5 or 6 reps and you stop at 4, in other words, you didn't go to failure.
Right.
You will get as much growth as you would have gotten if you had gone to failure, and as much growth as you would have gotten if you'd done a set of 30 or 40 reps to failure. You will not, excuse me, let me just finish this thought. Okay. You will not get growth on a high rep lightweight sets unless you go to failure.
Right.
You need failure when you're doing lightweight and high reps, because that's the only time you're going to get a high percentage of fiber recruitment. Whereas if you lift a heavy weight, from the time your first rep starts, you're already getting a high percentage of recruitment. You don't have to go to failure with heavy weight. So it's important to understand the distinction.
Let me throw a little Frank Zane in here. Frank Zane has written about failure. He said, failure, why would I want to fail at anything? And he gets a little flowery there, but
that's a little philosophical, but not.
Yeah, well, that's his bent, the Zen and all that, and but so he's never really gone to failure. So how would you define failure using it safely?
Well, there are some very, very good studies that Chris Beardsley, you guys should look up Chris Beardsley, exercise physiologist, very, very good articles where he explains, in fact, you could Google this. There's a great article about whether or not it's good to train to failure. And the answer is, generally speaking, no. Right? Generally speaking, there is more systemic fatigue that develops when you go to failure. And if you go to failure, now, by the way, it doesn't mean to never go to failure. But let's just say your objective is to do 10 sets of chest. You might think that the best way to get the most out of each of those sets is to go to failure in each of those 10 sets. Well, the fact is, if you do a good first set to failure, you probably won't last 10 sets.
That's true.
Right? But if you do last 10 sets, meaning you've got the mental fortitude to make yourself last 10 sets, you aren't going to get a good second, third, fourth, eighth, ninth, 10th set if you started failing on the first set. So there's a thing called proximity to failure. You want to get proximity to failure. You want to get close to failure. But if you go all the way to failure, then you're going to shortchange yourself on your subsequent sets. Yes, you can go to failure on your last set, maybe on your last 2 sets at most, maybe not every single workout.
I just want to give some sway to Scott Rosardi. He's a big,
Scott.
You know Scott. He just says good evening.
Scott, yeah.
Very
Good
loyal,
yeah.
Very loyal student. Scott, if you have any questions, throw them down for us because I know we're going to have some. I do want to mention, since we're on this, about set after set. You mentioned 10 sets, and you know I had Evan Centopani beat me up for 6 months a few years ago to get me back in shape, and it was quite expensive. How long do you rest for between sets? And he said, kind of ties into what you're saying. He said you rest long enough so you can go just as intensely as the
right. Yeah, I mean that's one of the biggest mistakes people have made in bodybuilding is they think the shorter the rest, the more fatigue, the better, the more productive, the more growth producing it is. And that's actually false. If you didn't rest enough between your sets, then that next set or 2 and 3, they're going to be compromised. You're either not going to be able to do as many reps or as much weight or with as much intensity. And in the end, you will actually get more conditioning for endurance than you will for growth, because you're bringing so much fatigue and your body is saying, I have to learn to adapt to fatigue, which is endurance, and you're not getting as much actual growth production.
We've got Mike Keeler, good member. He's always here. Hi, Mike. Are we talking the 50, 40, 30, 20, 15, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4?
Okay. There's a little bit of a story with that. I was talking to Steve Holman, who at the time was the editor-in-chief of Iron Man magazine. And he knew that I like to experiment. And he said, what are you experimenting with these days? And so I'm experimenting with 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. 5 sets. 5, 6 sets. And he said, oh, that's great. Now, the reason he was saying it was great, because at the time, which was about, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, right? There was a belief, a suspicion, a theory that we could produce significant sarcoplasmic muscle growth. Sarcoplasm is the fluid that surrounds the muscle fiber. That's where all the nutrients are. That's where the energy source is. It's the gas tank. So the theory was that if you did super high fatigue sets, that you would deplete that sarcoplasm and the body would super compensate, and overstore sarcoplasmic fuel. And that would contribute to the muscle expansion. So you would get myofibril growth and sarcoplasmic growth. And so he loved that 50, 40, 30, 20, 10 because he thought you covered your high reps and your low reps and you would get both. But since, by the way, sarcoplasmic growth has pretty much disappointed people. There's very, very, very little sarcoplasmic growth possible. But getting back to this thing, do I think 50, 40, 30, 20, 10 is good? Yes, I do. It has to be done the right way, right? If you do 50 reps and you do it to failure, then you're not doing it right, right? Because the 50 has to be at a lesser percentage of maximum effort than the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one. So
let me cut in, Doug, because you probably will explain this, but how does one, he's getting back to Evan for a second. He said when we were talking about that thing with the rest interval and attacking each set as with the same ferocity as best you can, how does one meter that when, how do you know to back off a little so you have enough for the next?
Well, this question, this subject is very, very complex, right? Because everyone wants a simple, like how many sets of how many reps? And it is so much more complicated than that. You cannot say 5 sets of this or 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, because it doesn't explain the percentage of effort of each of those sets with X weight. Right. So I could do, 20 sets with very light weight, and it's nothing compared to what 10 sets with a more challenging weight would be. So the number of sets and the number of reps doesn't even begin to tell the whole story. Part of the equation is the amount of weight you're using for that number of reps and your capability of handling that number of reps with that weight.
Doug, to get in front of the 50 for a second, do you do any type of pre-exhaust at all?
No. Look, pre-exhaust is excuse me for those of you that believe in it, but it's a ridiculous notion. Pre-exhaust
Supposedly Bob Kennedy was the progenitor of that, you know, from muscle.
Well, look, first of all, pre-exhaust assumes you're going to do more than one exercise. Okay. It implies you're going to do an exercise, like say leg extensions before squats.
Right.
At exhaust, you're going to pre-exhaust the quads and then go to your compound exercise. So the first thing I would say with that is you don't ever have to do a compound exercise. The leg extensions is good enough.
That's it.
That's it. Leg extensions or sissy squats or a version of one of those, right? I mean,
or Brignole cable squats.
Yeah, although even the cable squat, because it involves the hip joint, is going to trigger a little bit of reciprocal innervation, which is a little bit of a neurological conflict of interest. And so it's going to compromise the muscles involved just because there's two joints involved.
Okay.
That's important to know. I mean, people think, oh, multi-joint, much better. No, not necessarily, because some of these things trigger neurological interference precisely with the muscles you're targeting. So getting back to that, the intensity thing. So the ideal way to do 50, 40, 30, 20, 10 is that your final set would be your 100% maximum effort. Your previous set would be 95%, 90%, 85%. Your first set should be around 70, 75%, maybe 80%. It's meant to warm up the muscle so that you can be stronger in your heavier weight sets, right? It's not meant to make sarcoplasmic growth. It's not meant to create endurance in the muscle. It's meant to prepare you for the sets ahead. If you've got more time than 5 sets allows, then you'd be better off with something more like 30, 20, 15, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4. Right? More sets, generally speaking, is better than fewer sets, right? Because the number of sets, which we call volume, is one of the factors. So it is the intensity, meaning the proximity to failure, plus the volume that gives you the right balance of everything for optimal growth. So it's a very tricky thing to explain. Everyone wants a simple answer.
Well, no, Doug, that's why I have you here.
Well, let's just say that I had a student and he wanted to understand the right number of sets, the right number of reps. The first thing that's hard about that is even if that person is standing with me and we're going to do the same workout side by side, he can see me and he can see the amount of effort I seem to be putting into it, but he doesn't know exactly what I'm feeling and I don't know exactly what he's feeling. And I'm making my decisions about how many sets and how much weight to use and how many reps to use based on what I'm feeling, right? Because after years and years and years of doing this, we become intuitive and we know when it's time to stop, when it's time to go, when it's time to add or hold. And so still by him watching me, he can get a sense, if he's paying attention, he can get a sense of how much percentage of effort I use on each subsequent sets. And he can try to mimic that. But it's impossible to actually spell it out.
Yeah, it's too individualized. Mike Keeler says, but getting close to failure is key on each set?
No. I mean, obviously, you don't want to get close to failure on your first set.
Right. Not close.
You want that to be about 70% maximum effort.
Right, like you just
said.
And
75, 80%. You get, as the sets progress, then you want to get closer and closer to failure. In fact, you'd be better off doing, let's say, 3 or 4 sets of 95% effort than you would be doing 1 or 2 sets of 100% effort.
Right. Based upon what you said, I'm going to do my first.
The 95% is getting the same level of recruitment.
Same level of recruitment.
Yeah.
Right. Something you said earlier, a person will walk up to you and they'll, and I don't like these types of questions either. How many reps and sets should I do? That's, but I'm just going to do my first reference here. Page 4, early on, citing the fact that Arnold Schwarzenegger did a particular exercise and he looked good, end quote, is not a valid method of evaluation. Arnold, as one example, did many exercises, some of which were good and some of which were bad. So obviously, leading into what I'm trying to say, people will say, well, Arnold does that, so I'm going to do what Arnold did and hopefully look like Arnold. It doesn't work that way, does it? Same thing.
Look, I mean, just logically speaking, right? Logically speaking, there are a lot of things that you do in the day, in addition to working out, right? To assume that a bad exercise contributed as much to the development of your muscle as the other exercises would be the same thing as saying that brushing your teeth contributes to it. right? In other words, the bad exercises don't take away benefit from the good ones.
Right. May I ask, when you said maybe you were not, but you said Arnold did some exercises which were good and some which were bad, because I've seen some pictures from the old days, the things they did we wouldn't do today. Give me an example that you wouldn't recommend, even though he grew anyhow.
Okay, look, here's the thing is, let's just say we're going to look at an upright barbell row. Okay, that exercise is very inefficient.
Very, yes.
Inefficient means that you're comparing the amount of weight you're using to the actual amount of load that muscle, the contributing muscles, are actually getting, right? So you have to use 3-4 times more weight with an upright row than you'd have to use with a side raise. And if you're doing, an upright row, like I'm gonna slide over here so you can kind of, you see my right shoulder. Oh, there you go, my right shoulder. All right. So if I do a side raise, my right arm goes up and down, right? If I do an upright row, my right arm goes up and down, right? So my right arm is doing the exact same thing relative to the shoulder joint and relative to the lateral deltoid in both cases. The only difference is that one had a longer lever because it included the forearm, and one had a shorter lever because the forearm was actually used to diminish the length of the upper arm, right? And then I've also rotated the arm internally, which is of no benefit to the lateral deltoid whatsoever, right? So all you've done is an exercise that distorts the joint and forces you to use more weight because you've reduced the magnification of that weight.
May I ask?
So let me just finish this thought. Let me just finish that thought. So if Arnold did the upright row, it doesn't mean that he did an exercise that subtracted benefit, right? It just means that he did an exercise that either took far more weight to get the same benefit as the other exercise would have given him, or gave him less benefit. So whereas the side raise might be considered a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, the upright row might have been a 3. Well, 3 is better than nothing, but it wouldn't have been good as twice as many of the 10.
That's true. Upright rows, I've done a video on this where I use dumbbells instead of a fixed grip because of impingement. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, look,
I don't think anybody should use a straight bar. I prefer dumbbells for freedom.
Well, look, first of all, impingement implies that the upper arm is going higher than parallel to the ground, right? That means you're pinching. That's what impingement is. You're pinching the supraspinatus tendon and the subacromial bursa in that joint because you're causing that squeezing by moving the upper arm bone up against the acromion process, which is the outer edge of the shoulder blade. Okay. Right. When you do an upright row with the way you just described with dumbbells, which by the way can even be compared a little bit to a bent arm side raise, right? Because when you get to the top, your arm is bent, right?
Correct. Yep.
So what's happening is you've shortened the length of this lever, right? Now it's no longer this long, and now it's half as long, right? And this now is also a lever that is being pulled downward and creating a rotational force in your shoulder joint.
And Doug talks exactly about this. The lever is very important.
So what happens is that weight wants to fall downward, and what's keeping it from falling downward is you using your infraspinatus to externally rotate, basically reverse arm wrestle that arm in order to keep this thing from collapsing, right? So there's two things wrong with that movement. One is that you're using more weight than you would need to use if you're using a straight arm, and you're creating a strain on your infraspinatus that is completely unnecessary. Now, somebody could say, well, it's good to work at the infraspinatus. And I would say, it is good to work the infraspinatus, but there are better, more productive, safer ways of doing that. That won't compromise the target muscle, which is the lateral deltoid.
Don't get injured. Marlon 57 asks, what bicep exercise does Doug feel is the most effective?
In my book, I explain that everyone's looking for a secret formula, a secret exercise, a magical exercise. And sometimes the most beneficial is the most obvious. Standing dumbbell curls is as good as it gets. And I don't say that, flippantly. I mean, I explain in my book every single thing related to the mechanics of standing barbell curls or dumbbell curls. You're starting with your elbow straight, which is a mechanical disadvantage. That's adding resistance. you start with your arm vertical, your forearm vertical, which is a neutral lever. So you're starting with neutral mechanical load, but maximum biomechanical disadvantage. So as soon as you start bending your arm a little bit, even the slightest angle of your forearm is greatly magnified by the fact that your bicep isn't able to pull perpendicularly on your forearm yet. When that forearm,
in the midst of what you're talking about, what do you think about people cheating? You know, oh, well, look, it's a reality. We see it.
No, look, I mean, there's an entire chapter in my book.
No, I know. That's why
on momentum, right? And what I say is it is foolish to use a weight that is beyond the capacity of that muscle, only to then subtract that resistance by using other muscles to create momentum. Yep. Your bicep knows what maximum load is, right? So if you do a strict curl and your bicep is working at maximum is maximum. You can't do better than maximum, right? So there's no way you can add more weight to maximum unless you somehow change something that helps. Yeah. It's not making your bicep stronger. It's not loading your bicep more. You've already identified what maximum capacity is. Right? So using your back isn't getting you more load.
Well, you'll get people who are curling a hell of a lot more than I can. I don't.
You froze there.
There's no development because they're throwing it and they're kind of bypassing.
Well, look, this is why biomechanics is so important. Is because you can't question math. Math is right. It is what it is. It's absolute. I mean, if you were an engineer, you can't fudge the numbers on a building, right? You can't fudge the numbers on a crane.
That's
correct. They're absolute. You know exactly how much load is here, and here, right? So what happens, unfortunately, is you look at a guy who's got a good physique in the gym or a bad physique in the gym, and you come to the conclusion they either know what they're doing or they don't know what they're doing based on how good they look. Right, which goes back to the Arnold thing. It's like Arnold looked good for a variety of reasons.
Oh yeah.
One of which was that he had great genetics. Right. The other is that he took the right supplements and enough of them. The other is that he did enough right things to offset the not so right things.
And Arnold had a lot of injuries. People don't hear about that.
And look, I mean, at the end of the day, as I've told you before, at the end of the day, the only thing that a muscle knows is whether or not it was sufficiently stimulated.
That's it.
Right. If sufficiently stimulated, quote unquote, required 3 times more effort, it doesn't know or care. Your skeleton knows and cares a lot, right? If I'm going to drive to that destination over there, you saw that post. If I'm going to drive to that destination, I can drive on a dirty, muddy, wet road, or I can drive on a smooth, dry road. I'm going to get there the same either way. The question is, how much unnecessary energy am I going to have to spend?
This falls into, I quote Zane all the time on this, and I know you're very Zane-like. In fact, I put your picture up repeatedly with Zane, Benfato, and I think John
Paris.
Yeah, Paris. You guys are like the pantheon of perfection. Or
thank you. Yeah.
Put them together. Certainly isn't me.
And by the way, I'm the only one of those that you mentioned that didn't become a pro bodybuilder.
Yeah, but look you're talking. Here you are helping thousands of people.
Yeah. And by the way, that was never my goal, was to be a professional bodybuilder. In fact, I didn't even really care that much. I mean, it's nice to win a Mr. America title, Miss Universe, but I really wanted the look.
Well,
as our friend Steve would say, the look, right? I really wanted that balance, that symmetry, that maximum development at all costs, even if it meant that doing that meant losing the first place trophy.
Well, we talked about why you stayed with the AAU. You said it was more family-like and whatnot. It certainly wasn't a path to IFBB, which is the major pro league. And right. I got that. It never really made a difference to you. But getting back to Zane, he said the muscle doesn't care about the amount of weight. That's only an abstract. It only cares about the resistance it provides.
Right. I mean, basically what I say is the muscle never pulls directly on the weight.
No.
The muscle pulls on the lever, on the limb that is holding the weight, right? Correct. So when you're curling, let's say 20 pounds, your bicep is not actually producing only 20 pounds of force, right? So that's why it's really important to understand the biomechanics, the physics of what's going on with resistance exercise, to understand that when you're doing a 10-pound side raise and you think that's wimpy, by the time your deltoid gets to it, which is, 30 inches later, 25 inches later, it's magnified some couple hundred pounds.
And, you know, I'm glad you're talking about shoulder. A lot of my patients who have had rotator cuff surgery, their orthopedic surgeon always tells them, don't ever do anything above head again. And of course, if you allow it to heal properly, you can, but most people don't follow instructions. So,
well, why would you want to do it again if that's probably what caused the injury?
You know how people think. I've told patients, you know, they say it hurts when I do this, and I say, well, don't do that. And I see them in the gym, they're still doing it.
Yeah.
But you know, the shoulder, I think you and I both know it's the joint that has the most mobility in the body.
Right.
With that coefficient of mobility, there's a very high bracket of its.
Well, the more mobility, the more unstable.
Oh, that's correct. So
right?
yeah,
the less mobility, the more stable.
You know, you mentioned a 10-pound. You know, you hear about guys they're doing side laterals with 80 pounds. You know, you're not just using the medial deltoid.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I don't. There's a lot of foolishness in this game, right? There's a lot of lack of logic in this game, right? So, and unfortunately. And I don't blame them. I mean, to the credit of most ambitious bodybuilders, they rate how well they're doing on how much they're lifting.
I know.
Right. And it doesn't make mathematical sense.
No.
I've done it to you before. I've shown it in book. I can prove to you that you can actually load a muscle more with less weight if you do it this way than if you do it that way. But people will do it that way because they can lift more weight, despite the fact that it's got all kinds of risk.
Doug,
right?
Doug, should these folks be asked this? Are you a mover of weight or a developer of muscle?
That's one way of saying it. I wouldn't say it that way. I would just say, you know, don't concern yourself with how much weight you're lifting. Don't try to rate how macho you are, how strong you are, how well you're doing on how much you're lifting, because everybody's got a different set of things they're dealing with. They've got different fast twitch, slow twitch muscle, different length limbs, right? And look, you know, at the end of the day, no one cares whether I can do 50 chin-ups or not. Nobody asks me how many chin-ups can you do. It's irrelevant. And if I could do 50 chin-ups, so what, right? What matters to me is that I'm strong enough to function in data. By the way, if you do resistance training on a daily basis or 4 or 5 days a week, you're going to have more than enough strength to do the things that people typically do in a day. Beyond that, it's like, so you can lift a car. So how often do you have to do that? All right.
Doug,
so there's that. And then there's also the fact that I want to look the best I can look. And when I keep doing it, as long as I can possibly keep doing it.
Right.
Right. So all those things together mean smart exercises, smart biomechanics.
The longevity is certainly the whole deal. You want to keep doing this until you know the end. In your career, would you say, did you ever go really heavy or too heavy, or was there a period, or were you always kind of parsimonious with, you know, the way?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I guess you could say I fell into the trap a little bit now and then. You know, I did squat 500 pounds one time.
Oh wow.
Was it something that I think was productive? Not the least bit productive.
No.
You know, I had my belt on, I had my spotter on each side, I had somebody behind me, you know. You fall into the temptation to see if you can do it, right? But it's not productive. I mean, squatting itself is less productive than working the quads separately and the glutes separately. Or I should be more specific, hip extension muscles separately and knee extension muscles separately, because to some degree they mutually exclude each other. They conflict with each other to some degree during a squat. But yeah, I mean, I never wanted to do a heavy deadlift. I mean, that to me from the very beginning was very, very logically stupid to see how much I can max deadlift one time. Yeah. I mean, I knew enough back then to know that no particular physique muscle is getting a lot of growth from a deadlift.
Yeah, you said that last time. Yeah.
And it's just such a dramatic load on the spine, with basically no payoff. No payoff unless you're powerlifting looking at prize money.
Wow.
Then there's payoff. But ego, I don't even call that payoff.
Considering what you're saying, in all honor and respect to the man, Ronnie Coleman, he says to this day, the only thing he's chagrined about is he only did 3 reps with 800-pound squat. He wishes he did 5. Let me ask you a question. You know, 800 pounds is 800 pounds, but not in the same, because, you know, he's a mess now, obviously.
Right.
He really is. He's really wrought havoc.
None of us want to be in the condition he's in right now.
No.
Yeah.
And this and that. I'm like, listen, you haven't had chronic pain yet. Please, just don't go there. Would have he gotten the same results if he stopped enough? Did he really have to, you know what I'm saying, for muscle growth in that case?
Well, the answer is yes. As I said earlier, you know, you don't have to go to failure to get muscle growth. You just have to have sufficient recruitment, right? So he's wrong in thinking that he would have benefited by doing an extra rep or two on that 800-pound squat. That's completely wrong. You know, he got all he needed to get from it. But moreover, I would say that even if he would have done squats with, let's say, 25% less weight, he was still training wrong. Now, what do I mean by wrong? There's a lot of people out there that are going to get mad at me for saying wrong.
That's
they're
what
going to say,
do.
look at you and look at Ronnie Coleman. Yeah, that's what they're going to say. But look, again,
I won't dare say anything in that case.
But again, yeah, but the numbers don't lie. Look, you can do a sissy squat with body weight. If you weigh 200 pounds, you can load each quadricep with about 1,200 pounds of resistance. If you weigh 200 pounds and you put a 200-pound barbell on your back and you squat with it, you're only going to get about 940 pounds of load per quadricep, right? So, you know, why would you risk compressing your spine to get less load than you can get with other exercises, right? So the problem is that you have to know the numbers. You have to know the physics. You have to know the science for this to sink in. I mean, if you don't believe what I'm saying, try doing a sissy squat. You think you're so strong? Okay, you're doing, let's say, a 300, 400-pound squat. Try doing 20 sissy squats all the way knees to the ground. And you'll see that the quads work every bit as hard, if not more so. Now, what's missing, of course, is that downward weight on your spine and torso, right? And we misperceive that as productive. We think, God, this is so heavy. This has to be productive. Well, yeah, it is truly heavy. And by the way, bones don't benefit from load the way muscles do. Yes, some load on skeleton is you know, density producing. So, right. But you know, when you add a ton of weight, that isn't more density producing than 10% or 20% of that would be.
We've got a question. I know Doug does not prefer incline presses for chest. I think we got this last time. The clavicular pec area that is so small, do you prefer a different exercise?
Well, yes, but here, let me explain. I mean, some of you have already heard this explanation. I'll just say it again. You know, if you lift your arms up and you look at yourself in the mirror and you draw an imaginary line right from one hand across the collarbones all the way to the other hand, and you ask yourself the simple question, what percentage of my pecs are above that line and below that line? And you realize 0% is above that line. All of your pectoral fibers are below your collarbone, and your arm is connected at the height of your collarbone. So when you're doing a flat press, you're already moving toward the highest part of your sternum, right? If you go on an incline, you're moving in the direction of your chin or your nose or your neck, but you're not moving toward any pectoral origins. Now, some people say, yes, but look at this anatomy chart, and you can see that the clavicular fibers angle upward. Well, they angle upward when your arms are down. When your arms are up, they're parallel to your arms and to the clavicles. Your clavicles actually shift. Right. And so when you're doing this, they're actually going, in my book, you probably saw there's a picture of a woman doing a flat dumbbell press. She's extremely lean, and you can totally see her clavicular fibers working more than the highest fibers on her sternum. So that's number one. You know, we evolved from quadrupeds. Through our evolutionary history, we never had to move our arms in an incline angle for anything. Certainly not pushing, maybe pulling fruit down, but not pushing, right? So we didn't evolve to have pectoral function or shoulder function that accommodates that movement, right? We started off as quadrupeds, and as we became more and more upright, we started moving our arms progressively downward, hence where the pectoral origins are located, right? Below the collarbone and on the ribs, in moving in that downward direction. So when you do a flat press or even a slight decline press, you're already moving toward most of the upper fibers. If you do a front press like this, which I typically do for front deltoids, you're moving also in the direction of your clavicle. And so you're going to get some clavicular pectoral movement from front presses with your elbows in close. But you're not going to get, and using Arnold as, well, look at Arnold, he had fantastic upper pecs. And they would say, well, look at his upper pecs when he was doing them. It's like, well, yeah, if you looked at his upper pecs when he was brushing his teeth, You would say, my God, that's got to be the best upper pec exercise. It's like, no, look, he was very, very muscular. He was genetically blessed with massive pectorals, right? And so they're going to flex when he's doing anything, especially in a semi-direction forward. But it doesn't mean that he was moving towards any pectoral origins. Hey, Mike.
Yeah, Mike. Mr. Brignole, it's Mr. Brignole's method had a tremendous impact on my transformation aesthetically starting in my 50s. Thank you, Doug. So yeah, you can get in shape in any.
Mike, for that. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Mo,
look who's there. Mo.
If you had to train, if you got all your friends here, man. If you had to train Dwayne Johnson for a role in a movie and achieve a certain look, knowing that he's been using compound movements mainly, which exercises would you put him through, I'm guessing, instead?
I'd put him through the Brig 20. I don't know if you know what the Brig 20 are, but basically they're the 20 best exercises for your physique. You can narrow this down. You can, if you understand all the 10 or 12 points that determine how good or how not good an exercise is, you can literally narrow it down and say, well, then therefore, this one here has the best resistance curve, the best active lever, the best alignment. You know, this one is the best. Maybe this is a close second right here. It's a little different, but still close enough, you know, and then you get farther and farther away from ideal, right? So you're better off doing the exercise that rate a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 all the time, rather than doing, let's say, a 10 this week and a 6 next week and a 2 the week after that and a 4 the week after that. You're just better off doing the same 1 or 2 exercises all the time because they're the most productive. So I would have him doing a decline dumbbell press or a decline cable press for pecs, 1-arm lat pull-ins for lats, scapular retractions for inner trapezius, blah, 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 all the ones that are in our course.
Mohanam, I don't know how he trains now. Does he train in a particular way, Doug? Do you know? Or?
Well, look, I don't know, but I've seen pictures of him doing what we consider a lot of the conventional exercises. Look, why would anyone like Dwayne Johnson or Mark Wahlberg or any of these guys, unless they've been exposed to the things I talk about in my book, why would they think anything other than incline bench press being good for the pecs, or incline dumbbell press, or overhead tricep extensions being good for the long head of the triceps, blah, 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 or torso rotation with a medicine ball being good for the the obliques? No, I mean, these are all mechanically flawed.
The bait shop guy says side shoulder cable raises are good for shoulders, good strength curve, and no impingement. What do you think of that? Yeah,
if you lie down on your side, if you do the exercise he's talking about, which is standing with a cable, a pulley right at the same height as your wrist when you're standing, so that you're
at the start point.
At the start, in other words, your cable is going right into your wrist perpendicularly when your arm is at your side, right? That's your maximum position. And as you raise that arm up and start to enter a more of a decreasing angle to the cable, the resistance diminishes, and that follows the strength curve of the muscle. Stronger at the beginning, weaker at the end. But you can get on your side on the ground. Better would be a slight incline with your head a little bit higher than your feet. Let's say a massage table that you've tilted just a little bit, right? And do a side dumbbell raise and get a very, very similar resistance curve. In fact, that's kind of what we're doing right now. We finally put together a little home gym. I didn't work out for about 5 or 6 months. I lost all my muscle.
Wow.
Because Equinox was closed, everything was closed. And so, finally my training partner built a little gym in his garage. And so now we've got dumbbells and cables and things like that. We don't have leg extension, leg curl, but that's all right. We make do. But
is your gym open now? Did everything reopen, or?
No, nothing's open.
Well, you're in California. It's still
in California. Now, what's interesting, I just read a study that they were saying that hair salons and gyms showed no increase of infection, whereas restaurants and bars did. Well, of course, that makes perfect sense, right? Because when you're in a gym or in a hair salon, you're wearing a mask.
Right.
When you're eating, you can't. When you're drinking, you can't. And those are more social areas, so there's more close proximity to other people, and you started breathing each other's air, right? But when Equinox did open for a short while, it was so vacant because most people were just being concerned and staying away. My training partner and I both wore masks, and we wore gloves because we were required to, but the closest other person was 30 feet away.
Did you find it hard doing sets with the mask on and breathing? No.
No.
Really?
I mean, maybe if I was running and I was doing cardiovascular work, that'd be different. But for weight training, it wasn't difficult at all.
Mike is reading your book now, chapter 3. Scott has another statement question. Lagging body parts, should I engage in more frequency or more volume? Both. Your thoughts doing the Brig 20 exercise for that given muscle?
Well, here's the thing is, if you think that more frequency or more volume would be helpful, then you have to also believe that the other body parts are working less than optimally. Right? I mean, the whole idea is you're choosing optimum, maximum sets, maximum frequency on everything, right? So if that's the case, then doing more sets and more frequency goes beyond what's optimum, right? So theoretically, it's not logical to assume that more, it would only be logical if you thought that for everything else, you're doing suboptimal, right? But having said that, I will say that there have been some studies that have shown that you can take a particular muscle and you can train it either every day, of course, not as much volume, but every day or every other day with a little bit more frequency, and you will get a little bit more growth, but it's short-lived, meaning you cannot continue that level of frequency, that level of intensity before you get into overtraining. At some point, it spills over and it becomes too much. That's why the frequency that we typically use for all our muscle groups is a frequency that's manageable, that's maintainable.
Doug, you being a very, very balanced bodybuilder, when I judged, you know, we would usually try to pick a person that stood out because that means everything was developed equally or as equally as possible. But in your course, in your history and training, what did you have that was not balanced, and what did you do for it? Did you compensate in any way or do more on that lagging body part and less on the others?
Well, genetically, my worst body part was always my pecs. I just never, ever, ever could get that thick slab. And by the way, it's not, someone can say, well, that's because you didn't do heavy bench presses. No, I actually did for a while do heavy bench presses. I had heavy incline presses. I had heavy incline dumbbell presses. I mean, you know, I tried everything in the book, and I got to give you a good Boyer quote in just a moment. But no, I mean, you know, some people just have a genetically, you know, lagging body part. And for me, it was always pecs. And in fact, somebody made a joke one time and they said, you know, you don't want to ask the guy with a great body part what he does for that body part. You want to ask the guy who had a weak body part and has explored every possibility and made some progress. That's the guy you ask, what do you do for your pecs?
Yeah.
But the Boyer quote was this, you know, everyone knows that Boyer had fantastic arms, right?
Great arms.
And everyone knows that Boyer didn't have fantastic abs.
No.
Right? So here's his quote. They asked him, what do you do for your arms? He says, it doesn't matter. Anything I do works, makes them big. He goes, what do you do for your abs? It doesn't matter. Everything I do fails. It's exactly right. It's exactly right. I mean, to some degree, genetics will determine the way you develop your physique. But we can work mechanically smart.
Right. Joe Natarelli, great member. Joe just bought your book just now. And,
hey, Joe, thank you so much.
Joe actually bought 10 of my books to give to 10 of his guys on his work cruise. So I don't know.
Nice.
I don't know if productivity went up or if there was all kinds of indiscretion. I hope not. I hope everything went okay, Joe. But you're gonna love his book. It's a very, very good buy. Scott says thanks. Mike Fees is a great. Mike has cerebral palsy. Very interesting guy. He's in his early 60s. He's really ripped, and you know he has to get around. He has to do things and gets it done. He still, you know, feels it in the muscle. Right. I told him one time, I go, listen, Mike, I don't know you. I can't examine you, but try to feel it in the target. That's the best I could have told him.
All the more reason why isolation exercises would be best for him.
Yeah.
Because if you've got cerebral palsy or anything having to do with coordination, the last thing in the world you want to do is a balancing act. Where you're coordinating multiple things happening at one time. I mean, you know, the mistake people often think, you know, years ago we were told that isolation exercises were shaping exercises.
Yeah.
Right. Or they were exercises that you would use to, you know, carve definition into that muscle. Well, definition is the absence of fat. So no, you can't spot reduce with an isolation exercise. That's number one. And number two is the muscle doesn't know what you're doing.
No. It
doesn't know if you're doing an isolation exercise or a comp. It just knows it has a job. If my job is to pull that limb toward this origin over here, I don't have eyes, I don't have ears. All I'm doing is I'm pulling on that limb, And if I'm working at maximum, I'm going to develop at maximum, period.
Doug, now that I got you on this, maybe we could finally end this because there's this conundrum. It goes back and forth. Can you train to develop a peak on your bicep?
No. No, you cannot. You cannot change the shape of any muscle per se. I mean, yes, you can slightly work the upper fibers or the lower fibers of the chest because they go in different directions. But bicep fibers travel in one direction, and they do one thing. They shorten and they bring the origin and the insertion closer together. There was a myth I just heard the other day. One of these, false beliefs. I think actually Vince Gironda may have preached it.
Gironda.
He believed that if you did spider curls, you know what a spider curl is, right? That's where you get on a bench. Oops. That's where you get on a bench and you do your curl like this, right?
Yep.
So I don't know whether he was the one who actually said it this way or not, but the way it was presented to me was that when you move your arm at perpendicular to your torso, your brain tells your bicep to shut off, which means that the muscles underneath the bicep have to do all the work, and then they push the bicep up, and that creates the peak.
The brachialis.
Well, the brachialis isn't directly under the bicep. It's kind of under and to the side.
Right.
And it's not even all the way up. It's only on the lower half of the humerus.
That does help peak, though.
No.
It doesn't.
No. In fact, if you look at some of my pictures where I'm doing up, my brachialis is right on the outside. It's not directly underneath the bicep. That's number one. And number two is there's no way that moving your arm at a perpendicular angle to your torso will shut off your bicep. The only thing that'll shut off your bicep is loading the tricep.
That's correct.
If you load the tricep, reciprocal innervation tells the bicep to shut off. But there's no tricep activation during a spider curl. So no, your bicep isn't shutting off. You're feeling something. You're feeling it cramping, right? Yes. People think that's peaking. That is not peaking. That is an over-shortening of the bicep. What you've done is you've brought the insertion of the bicep closer to the origin, and now you're triggering a degree of active insufficiency, which is an over-shortening, which causes a weakness of the fibers because the actin filaments are sliding too far together and running out of contractile force. So no, not only was he wrong, was that myth wrong in the sense that your bicep shuts off, but it was also wrong in the sense that you cannot change the shape of a bicep. Even if you could somehow deactivate the bicep, the whole thing made no sense at all.
So we're talking Albert Beckles, Robbie Robinson, Marcus Rule, and Arnold, some of the best peaks ever. They would have had those as long as they worked the bicep, right? So
like Boyer Coe said, anything I did created the same result.
I meant to include Coe in that list because he's another one.
Yeah, you're look, I've known lots and lots of people that have tried lots of different exercises and they never change the shape of their bicep or now they might think they did, and sometimes they might say they think they did because they have some commercial gain for it. Like Larry Scott used to sell preacher curls because he knew everyone wanted Larry Scott arms.
Yeah, right. Arms that stun.
Let me ask you a question. You've known lots and lots and lots of bodybuilders who have done preacher curls. Have any of them gone to Larry Scott arms?
No.
Not a single one.
No.
Not a single one. And they've done the exercise they were supposed to do it.
Well, that was a big thing with Menser and Arnold, and supposedly why Arnold wanted to do Menser. But Menser postulated, listen, before the 80 Olympia, he said, if Arnold's training system is so good, why don't we see any people that look like Arnold? Of course, that pissed Arnold off a lot. But
well, to some degree, there was some truth in that, right?
Yeah, yeah, good point.
And what I'm saying, by the way, it just so happens that I have this book on biomechanics, and I was also a bodybuilding champion. Right? Most biomechanics authors aren't bodybuilders, and most bodybuilders aren't biomechanics authors. Right? So what I'm saying in my book would be true whether or not I actually had a good physique.
Well, Doug, you're probably the strongest biomechanics author in the world.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, right? You could say the biomechanics author that is most accomplished in physique competition.
Yeah, that's a niche. There's probably not one other person that fits that designation on the planet. And out of 7 billion people, that's pretty good. We've got our own little. What's that?
Here's the other thing too: is that there are lots of biomechanics professors that you cannot understand what the heck they're saying. In other words, they will speak in a language that's very abstract. And so fortunately, English was always my favorite language. When I was in high school, I would always get straight A's you know, when I was dissecting the sentence or whatever, I always knew where the verb was and the adjective and the pronoun, and I have good vocabulary. So part of what makes my course and my book easy to understand is the way I'm able to articulate those complex things and illustrate them and show them and use comparison. Like I use the Leaning Tower of Pisa in one example to show what I call opposite position loading. Like if the tower is leaning north, you'd have to stand on the south side. That's the way muscle works as well.
They say, I might have been sure, but he said, if you can't explain something in 2 sentences so even a 6th grader can understand it, then you don't understand it yourself. We've got Mark Plano here.
I have to disagree with that. I'm sorry, Mark, for just a second. Hey, Mark Plano, nice to see you. Thank you for coming in.
Mark.
I just wanted to say really quickly that is kind of an excuse that people use, because some of these things literally cannot be explained in 2 sentences. They cannot, right? And so it requires more. It may even require some visuals, right? Even when you're simplifying it as I do, it still requires some explanation. But there are people who will say, no, that's way too complicated for me. You're trying to, you know, blow us a smoke screen.
Yeah.
And it's nonsense. That's not true.
Wait,
what happened to Mark?
Oh no, Mark's there. I just he just said hello, and you're dropping truth bombs. I've done a couple of videos. I go over to Mark's facility, and he helps me. He explains stuff. We do some videos sometimes.
Oh, nice! You're lucky. I'd love to visit his facility.
Yeah, they're really good. He puts me through the moves and everything.
Good. Excellent.
Listen, that's why I have you here. I learned. I've been wrong on 3 or 4 issues already, which is good because now I learn. Because, you know, if you're not, listen, would you agree that school is never out for the pro? I'm always
learning, and you always have to be ready to change your opinion if you get better information.
And Doug, you're working in a milieu infested with people who already know everything. You know that, right?
Oh, yeah, I think they do. You know, I think I told you that there's a saying that says that the enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It is the illusion of knowledge.
Oh, yeah. I just read that. I might have read it from you. Yeah.
And there's another quote that says that the people that are most confident about what they think they know are often the ones that are wrong. The people that are right are the most unsure, because we're always ready for more information that may change your mind. You have to always be ready. You cannot be too proud of your opinion, because you have to be very, very able to receive new information. Once you close that door, you're never going to gain any more knowledge, and you're not going to correct your false knowledge.
No, you don't want, and you're going to disseminate it, which is even worse. Yeah. A guy with a very cool name, Philly Hercules.
I see that. Maybe that's a nickname.
If you're born with the name Hercules, you're just going to have a life like Sisyphus, I guess.
Yeah. You actually, if you're named like that, you actually have to work out.
You better. If you know what I always say, you know, sometimes people need, they help moving the furniture. I go, listen, all my friends are like Hercules, but they're also damn lazy. They're not going to help you move anything.
That's true too. Yeah.
He says, if you want to maintain muscle and lose body fat at the same time, what is the best cardio and how often? Kind of broad, but maybe you can.
Oh, that is broad. That is broad. And the first thing that has to be acknowledged is if you want the maximum of each, they don't coexist. You can't get maximum muscle gain and fat loss. You can't get maximum muscle loss and muscle gain, right? So you can get a little bit of both, and only for a short period of time, for a while, not forever. But if most bodybuilders, what we typically do is we just sort of push aside fat loss for a while. We don't get fatter, but we don't emphasize fat loss. We emphasize muscle gain by making sure we're getting plenty of calories. In other words, more calories than we're actually spending. And then at least a little bit more than we're spending. And then we're trying to optimize muscle growth. And then when it comes time to get lean, you know, we have to go into a calorie deficit, which of course is going to compromise muscle gain. So from that premise, let me just, again, math and the numbers don't lie, right? You are not going to lose body fat unless you take in fewer calories than you're spending. Calorie deficit leads to body fat loss. It forces your body to burn its reserves because there's not enough coming in from the outside. However, calorie deficit literally causes at least some degree of muscle loss. And the reason for that is very simple. It's because your body is trying to preserve itself. And when it senses a deficit of calories, it says, I cannot afford to sustain an indefinite loss of calories. So I will have to reduce the size of my motor. I will have to take my V8 motor and make it a 4-cylinder. How does it do that? Decreases your testosterone level so that you lose muscle size, decrease your metabolic rate so your metabolism doesn't go as fast, right? Those things are important for muscle gain too. So that's why when people are training for bodybuilding contests, I'm not advocating steroid use, but I am advocating keeping an eye on your blood test results. If you're taking your blood test results on a regular basis and you're getting ready for a competition and you see that your testosterone is plummeting and your thyroid is plummeting into unhealthy levels below normal ranges, anybody that would be below normal on either testosterone or on thyroid should bring themselves back into the normal range, right? So doing so, of course, is taking testosterone or thyroid medication, but you're trying to preserve your health.
That's what it's for. Just to expand on this, how do you feel about fasted cardio?
You know, they've tried it both ways. Fasted cardio theoretically works. But the problem is everyone reacts a little bit differently to it. So some bodies will say, hey, you're not going to give me any fuel. I'm just going to slow down my metabolic rate. I'm not going to survive if I keep the same metabolic rate. You're asking me to give you a fuel production and you're not giving me any fuel supply. You know, so in some people, it might work in the short term. And then in the end, it ends up making you burn fewer and fewer calories in order to survive. So, you know, I will say this too, that cardio in and of itself is not an absolute way of losing fat. For me, it's not. And in fact, I've actually tried getting ready for a competition with cardio and without cardio, and I can get leaner without cardio.
Really?
And with cardio. And the reason for that is because I tend to be ectomorphic. And so I tend to be more of an endurance body. And so endurance bodies tend to adapt very well to endurance type exercise, which means we learn to compensate and burn fewer and fewer calories per amount of effort than we used to before. So for example, in my case, I'd ride a stationary bike. I would check my heart rate. It would be, let's say 110, 115 per minute, same intensity, same everything. A month later, it's 90. A month later, it's 85. A month later, it's 80. All right. So I tried it both ways. And I was actually, when I competed for Mr. California, I didn't do any cardio whatsoever. And I was ripped.
Doug,
if you're a bigger frame guy, it benefits you more in terms of fat loss. But it doesn't benefit everyone across the board.
But if you don't do cardio, the classic cardio, treadmill, stepper, whatever it might be, and you get, would it be by increasing your intensity, training intensity? Is that with the weights? Does that increase as the contest? Yeah,
I'm sorry. You just cut out for a second. Did you say that you don't get cardiovascular benefit, or did you say you don't get as lean?
No. You said there are times you don't do classic cardio for a show, but you still get really ripped. Would that be because you increase your intensity in the workouts?
No, frankly, well, I mean, I sort of end up increasing the intensity just because, you know, that's the competitive nature, right? As it gets closer and closer, you get more and more hungry. But the fact is that you will lose every time that you lift weights. You burn both fat and carbohydrate. So it's wrong to assume that weight training, because it's anaerobic, that you don't lose any fat at all. And it's wrong to assume that when you're doing cardiovascular exercise, which is aerobic, that you're only burning fat, you're not burning any carbohydrate. At all times, fuel expenditure is a mix of free fatty acids and glucose, carbohydrates. So when I decrease my caloric intake pre-contest, my body is going to take fuel from everywhere. It's going to take it from your body fat storage because that's what you have more of to spare.
Doug, I wanted to talk. I'm sorry, I'm just scanning for questions here. There's still some more over here, but we'll get to them. I did make a video a while back, and I changed my mind now after talking to you, but I presented the shearing force, the supposed shearing force on the knees, and the problems that arise in patella tracking, supposedly, and then the chondromalacia patella, which is degeneration underneath the kneecap, very painful. when doing leg extensions or knee extensions?
Well, chondromalacia is not something that happens as a result of leg extensions. It's a thing that happens as a result of your particular and individual's particular anatomy. In other words, if they have an imbalance of some sort that pulls their kneecap to one side instead of tracking it up the middle, then that's an issue that they have uniquely. It's not caused by leg extensions.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so if you have chondromalacia, if you have a tendency to get chondromalacia, you're going to have knee problems going upstairs, doing anything.
I mean, yeah, I have that now. Yeah, that's
you
true.
know, that's just the way your knee happens to work. You know, it's not tracking correctly. That's not exercise related. That's individual related. In terms of, you know, whether or not you get any shearing from a leg extension, you know, what I explained with my little model thing here is if this is the upper leg and this is the lower leg, the tibia, and this is the tendon, you know, your quadricep comes over here. Then right about here, it starts with this thing that's called the patella, the quadricep tendon. The quadricep tendon goes over the kneecap and then becomes what's called the patella tendon. So, but let's just call it one tendon, right? It's all being pulled by the quadricep. So imagine you've got 50 pounds pushing at your ankle right there from a leg extension machine. The first thing that you need to see is that without any kind of contraction from the quadricep, when you push in right here, you don't get any shearing at the knee, shearing being this.
Right.
Right. Now, if I push high on my shin, right, I still probably wouldn't get any shearing unless at the same time I held the back of the heel. If I hold the back of the heel and here, and I pull forward on the bottom and push inward, and I did it hard enough, I could probably cause that knee to shear, right? But the tendons in the knee are fairly strong. And if you push in right here, this will just swivel because of the length. This is the path of least resistance. It swivels instead of shifting. So, but because of the length of the lower leg, which is about 20 inches, you're going to get about a 20-fold magnification that the quadricep needs to produce in order to move the amount of weight you have here. So if you have 50 pounds going at the ankle, you need 1,000 pounds of quadricep contraction to move 50 pounds at the ankle, right? Now, obviously, the longer the leg, the bigger the difference, right? If you were to put the roller right here, the ratio would be less, but here it's 20-1, right? So that means when you do a leg extension, you have 20 times the force pulling up and around in order to get the knee to go out. And that is an anchoring effect, right? So someone tried to make, you know, because what I did is I showed this thing right here. And this is what I typically use to show the way a leg extension, you know, wait a minute, where am I here? So the quadricep pulls right here, pulls up and over the knee. And someone made the remark that the knee isn't just a hinge, that it does float around. And yeah, that's true. But that doesn't mean that you're still not getting 20 times the upward force, the anchoring force, than you are applying in the knee, right? And if you're going to think that there's two problems with thinking that there's shearing in the knee besides what I just showed you. One is that the concept of applying resistance at the end of the operating lever of your target muscle, i.e., the operating lever of your quadricep is your lower leg bone, right? So applying resistance at the end of that lever is no different than you holding a weight when you're doing curls, or holding a weight when you're doing triceps, or holding a weight when you're doing side raises. I mean, this is what resistance training is based on. It's based on loading the lever that is operated by a particular muscle. And the farther away from the muscle you load it, the more you create magnification. And so the less weight you actually have to use to create that much load on the muscle. So it is ridiculous to think that applying a perpendicular force to the lower leg is bad, but it's not bad for any other body part.
Why do we have that out there, this misconception that, you know, leg extensions are bad?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to. Everybody is taking the advice of other people, right? It's the blind leading the blind, right? True. If you are a physical therapist in training and you're going to a class or you're talking to another physical therapist who's been in the business longer, and he tells you that, you're not going to question it. You're not an engineer. You're not a physics guy.
Right.
You just assume that people that have been doing it longer than you know. So you trust, foolishly, but you trust that they're leading you in the right direction. But here's the thing is that, without perpendicular forces on levers, you're never going to get a load on a muscle. So the idea that they say, don't let your knees go over your toes when you're squatting. Same thing. When they're saying that, what they're really saying is don't let your lower leg interact perpendicularly with gravity. Well, if it's not going to interact perpendicularly with gravity, then you get no quadricep load.
Right.
All right. Now, if you have knee pain, and some people will say, yes, I have knee pain. I saw somebody wrote, well, I never have knee pain with knee extension, but I always have knee pain with squats. Well, that's good. Look, knee pain is not a normal thing. When someone has knee pain, they usually have knee pain because something's going wrong with their knee. They've got some kind of swelling. They've got some kind of issue going on with their knee. If you've got, let's say, a deterioration of your cartilage or anything going on underneath your kneecap, the heavier weight you use, getting back to my example here, the heavier weight you use, the more that this patella tendon is going to push down on your kneecap, right? The more force that's being produced by the quadricep, the more tightness, the more downward force that's generated. So if you have a knee that can't tolerate that, you're going to have to use lighter weight. Doesn't mean the exercise is bad. It just means you've got something going on underneath your knee that doesn't like having a lot of pressure put on it. But to say the exercise is wrong, you'd have to explain the mechanics of what makes it wrong. And the mechanics is exactly the same as it is for the triceps.
Somebody asked me earlier today, they're not on here right now though, but they want me to ask you about removing the forearm flexors when you're working the bicep. In other words, it'd be a grip issue. You're dropping your grip like this.
Right.
What do you think about that?
I have to tell you, that's a little bit confusing. Yes, there are two things that are confusing to me.
I don't mean to do that to you.
No, but I mean, look, this is what science is all about.
No, I understand. Right.
Science is saying there's a little bit of a quagmire here. I don't quite understand. Knowing what I know about the mechanics, I don't quite understand why this should be the case, and yet it's undeniably the case, right? So when we do a curl, we notice that if you tip your hand back like this, it feels different. Now, aside from the fact that it's changing the angle, right? It's not in line. You've actually changed the angle a little bit, and you may be changing the distance a little bit. The forearm flexor, for the most part, doesn't cross the elbow joint. And so it starts kind of like mid-forearm and crosses the forearm and then goes to your hand. So the forearm, aside from keeping the forearm muscle, aside from keeping the wrist straight during curls, doesn't actually participate in the elbow flexion part of the movement. The brachioradialis does,
right? But
the forearm flexor doesn't, right? So it's interesting, and I'm still analyzing it, why it is that we feel a little difference in the bicep in the way it contracts. I do feel it. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'll have to study it some more. I'll give you the other one that's mystifying. When you do, let's say you're sitting on the ground.
Hey, Doug, I'm kind of happy I you a little, actually.
You stumped me, right? And by the way, if anyone out there wants to help me figure this out, I'm all for it. I'm not too proud. Listen, I'm not proud, right? I mean, we're all after truth, is what we're after here.
We want answers, solutions,
right? Regardless of where they come from. So
correct.
if you're sitting on the ground, right, with your knees straight in front of you and your toes pointed, and you reach forward, you'll feel a certain amount of hamstring stretch, right?
Yes.
If you bring your toes back, which theoretically stretches your calves, you feel more stretch on the hamstring.
Correct.
I don't know why we would.
It's strange.
Because your hamstring does not connect to your ankle.
Right.
So the position of your ankle shouldn't matter.
How would you even determine that?
Well, it's one of these things that it's like the what do you call it? The cube.
Yeah.
I was just
talking about the Rubik's Cube today.
You know, it's one of those things that, you know,
maybe hook somebody up to a nerve conduction device or something like that.
Well, I mean, there's no need to do that. We can feel that it's happening.
Right.
We don't need to prove that it's happening. What I need to understand is why the hamstring would be affected by the position of the ankle.
Right. Yeah.
It's easy to understand why the calf would be influenced by the angle of the knee and the ankle. That's easy to understand.
Dr. Plano, if you're still watching, Dr. Plano, we'd like to, because you're a smart, you know, things that we, you know, collectively speaking. Oh, he just popped on. Perhaps fascial connections, he says.
Yeah, well, yeah, it could be. I'll have to really scrutinize it a little bit. And, you know, when you do a seated calf raise versus a standing calf raise, you know, knee bent versus knee straight, it's easy to understand what you're feeling based on the degree of bend in your knee. Right, because the gastrocnemius crosses both joints, right. But the hamstring does not cross the ankle joint. So, when you're doing that, yes, you also feel calf stretch. There's no doubt of that. That's understandable.
Well, Doug, you know, these days it seems like they don't know who they should give the Nobel Prize to. So maybe you figure this stuff out.
Maybe that's what I need to do. Yeah.
Why the hell? Muhanam came back with another. This is in relation to the leg extensions. I believe some machines are not well designed. The pivot is either too high or too low. I agree.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look. I mean, there's a picture that I posted where I took basically a straight rod and I put it on the seat of the leg extension machine at one particular gym. And once that thing was in place, you could actually see that the pivot of the machine was below the level of the seat.
Wow.
Now, there's no way your knee could be there, because even if you had no hamstring on your femur, even if you could lie your femurs flat on that thing, your knee would still be above the pivot of the machine.
Right.
It's supposed to be right alongside it.
That's
right. So there's no way that thing is built right. Right. And this is a reputable company.
Yeah.
Right. This is not some fly-by-night company. In fact, the other gym where I work out, which has an old Body Masters machine, and it's old. It's the kind with the gold Kevlar belting.
Wait, what's it called? What kind of machine?
It's Body Masters.
Oh, Body Masters, Boyer Co. Right.
Yeah, right. That pivot is perfect and it feels great. And it's an older machine and not as slick.
If you can find some of that old stuff, it's still floating around. You know, they haven't reproduced.
Well, look, I'm not saying all the old stuff is better, all the new stuff is worse. I'm just saying that, you know, these guys got it wrong. Right. Yeah. The pivot had to be higher. It also shouldn't be too far in front of the seat and nor too far behind the seat. You know, and by the way, and I always tell people, look, you know, I'm throwing this out there as a freebie. If anybody wants to capitalize on this, you know, go for it. You know, this is not something, you know, I'm not so money driven that I want to hoard, right? Yeah. But leg extension machines are essentially never built correctly, and to some degree they can't be correctly for everybody, and that is for this reason. If you were to sit on a massage table, that's high enough where your legs can hang straight down, right? And you look down at your feet, you likely will see that your heels are closer together than your toes, right? Most of us are, in fact, toes out, right? And the reason for that is because our femurs are slightly externally rotated. That means that the pivot of each knee is not parallel to the other.
Right.
They're both slightly angled outward. And not only outward, but also down on the outside, up on the inside. So a perfect leg extension machine would be one that has two separate pivots, two separate lever arms, one that allows each lower leg to travel its path, a little to the right and at a slight diagonal, a little to the left and a slight diagonal.
Its own congruency, right?
Right, and then you have perfect knee extension. To some degree, when people say leg extension hurts my knee, well, it could be because they've got this leg extension that has a pivot too low, lower than the seat, or it could be because their knees are much more angled out. Excuse me, hold on. You know, there are people who tend to be naturally pigeon-toed. There are people that tend to have their feet perfectly straight together. I have one client who's so duck feet. He's got his feet so far out, he can't even ski.
Wow.
Because he's going to...
Oh, my God.
He can't even keep the skis parallel, right? So that's the problem with the leg extension machine, is that we all have a slight different angle to our knee.
Right.
right? But at the very least, most people have a slight outward angle. So at the very least, gym equipment companies would do well to start making leg extension machines that have two separate pivots that go in slightly different directions.
And they don't have
it.
That is a great idea. I want to ask you a question, Doug. Another exercise that I like. I'm very mindful of everything, but I've had 2 open repair on both shoulders over the years. Totally rehab them, and they're just as good as they were, I guess. Maybe in a little bit of a different way. But I'm keeping the joint open. In other words, for instance, one of my exercises I like are tricep bench dips. You're on the bench and your feet are out. Maybe throw a plate on your thighs. I don't put any weight on anymore. But classically, people put their hand like this. I put my hand out like that because it opened this versus that. This closes this up. Keeping like that seems to open the joint up here, and I don't feel any discomfort. Do you have any take on that?
Yes. That's a lot.
You understand what I'm saying, right? As far as
but it's a very, very low value tricep exercise.
Oh, is it?
And aside from the fact, and I'll tell you why it's a low value.
I want to know. Yes.
Yeah. You're identifying one of the problems with it is that it actually strains the shoulder joint, not only more than it would need to, but I mean, the shoulder joint theoretically doesn't have to work at all.
Hey, Doug, my dogs are crying right now because you've totally destroyed me for the 4th time now tonight. No, but it's good. I absorb.
Okay, look, when in my book, what I explain is this thing that's called exercise efficiency.
Okay.
And efficiency has to do with the amount of resistance versus the amount of load. Okay, so all limbs that are being operated by a muscle are going to be at maximum efficiency when that limb encounters resistance perpendicularly.
Okay.
Okay. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, for those of you that don't know this, if you have a pendulum hanging from a clock, let's say, and you could somehow strip away the walls of the clock, and you've got a weight at the end of this pendulum, it's going to be in the neutral position when it's hanging vertically, right? It doesn't need my help to hang vertically. It's going to be there on its own. If I move it all the way up and over the pivot, it's going to be balanced over the pivot, which is what support beams in buildings are, right? They're vertical for that reason, because weight is coming straight down and the force is going through the bone and not trying to move it to one side or to the other side, right? So if you took this vertical lever arm right here and you move it to one side, I just happen to have a lever device right here.
Oh, how convenient.
What do you know? Okay, so you've got this lever device right here. And when this thing is hanging vertically from the pivot, it doesn't need my help. But as I move this thing away, I'll do it right here so you can see my hand, it wants to come back with a certain amount of force. Now, if I put a scale right here and I measure the amount of force that this thing is holding, it'll be half as much force approximately as it would if I was here, higher up. In other words, vertical is 0, horizontal is maximum, 45-degree angle is a 50% active lever, meaning I've got 50% of the load I would have here. Then once I get over, it's again at a 45-degree angle on the upper half, it's 50%. And then once it's straight up, it's 0 again. Okay. This is the way all levers work. Now, I'm oversimplifying a tiny bit, because if you use trigonometry, you would find that those numbers aren't exactly 50%, and that's okay. The goal of biomechanics is to understand what is more and what is less and what is somewhere in between, and approximately how much in between it is. Okay. So if you're doing, let's say, a skull crusher and you're lying on your back, when your forearms are vertical, the tricep has no load at all. As that forearm starts to come more into an angle with gravity, which is pulling straight down, it increases its load on the tricep. So when it's at a 45-degree angle relative to the ground, it's half as much as it would be when your forearm is horizontal. Okay, so a skull crusher lying on your back with, let's say, a pair of 20-pound dumbbells or whatever, when your forearm is horizontal, you are using a maximally efficient lever. You're getting 100% of the available resistance on that tricep. You're getting the most amount of magnification that you can get. when you're doing parallel bar dips or bench dips, your forearms are never horizontal, right? They're only veering away from the neutral position by a few degrees. So that means you're only getting a percentage. Now, someone could say, well, I feel it in my triceps. Well, you feel it in your triceps because you're using 180 pounds of body weight.
Right.
Right. But with 20 pounds of weight, you can get as much load or more. So in my book, I have a thing that I explain, actually in one of our Smart Training 365 webinars. I show the difference between a parallel bar dip and a skull crusher. And what I show is that if you're a 200-pound guy, you have 100 pounds per arm, and you're descending into the parallel bar dip, and the length of your forearm is a 12-to-1 magnifier. So you take 100 pounds times 12 times the percentage of active that your forearm becomes, which is only about 11% active. It only veers from the neutral position a little bit, right? 100 pounds. I don't know if I got the 100 pounds right. I might have used a different body weight. 100 pounds times 12 times 11% is 119 pounds of load per tricep, right? Okay, so far so good. If you lie down on that flat bench over there with a pair of 20-pound dumbbells and you let your forearm go horizontal, you're getting the 100%. So 20 times 12 times 100% is 240 pounds of load per tricep. And the total energy cost is only 40 pounds versus a body weight of 200. So if you wanted to get 240 pounds of load on each tricep by doing parallel bar dips, you'd have to add a bunch of weight to your torso. And in doing so, you probably would blow out your front deltoid. Right? You probably couldn't do it. So there's no way that you could call parallel bar dips a good tricep exercise or a bench dip a good, because it's so inefficient. You're having to use so much more load in order to get less load on your tricep, less resistance. Then you have to get with something that's just better mechanics.
You did say it was all about efficiency too. Originally.
Well, efficiency is part of it. Efficiency is the ratio of amount of weight that you need to use to get X amount of resistance on a muscle. That's part of it. The other is the anatomical direction of movement, right? So if you're moving a limb precisely toward that muscle origin, that means that muscle fiber is doing everything, all the work. So let's just say you're going to do a flat press like this, right? Well, that's very efficient because I'm moving the insertion toward the origin on my sternum, right? I'm moving straight toward the fiber. But if I go like this, now all of a sudden I'm not moving toward those fibers. I'm moving in so I'm not pulling backward. I'm not in a completely different direction, but I veered away from the perfect direction, which means that now instead of getting 100% participation from that muscle fiber, now it's only giving me like 70, 60, 50% participation. It's assisting, but it's not doing all the work. So that's the other part of it. And the last part of it is the neurological part of it, which is trying to avoid reciprocal innervation, active insufficiency, bilateral deficit, these things that interfere with optimum muscle strength.
I have one more from earlier today. Somebody shot me a question. Couldn't come on right now, but anybody can watch this later. You can watch it in perpetuity, which is good. And you rarely see. I know I started in the 70s like you did, and everybody did, Olympic bar press behind the necks for deltoids. And this one guy still does them, but he says he never feels them in the deltoids. They don't feel right. And I go back to that old thing. I tell people, if it doesn't feel good, don't do it. Yeah. What are your thoughts on press behind the neck, and why is that potentially not good for the shoulder?
Well, I mean, a press behind the neck is an even more dangerous, less natural form of exercise than even the overhead presses in front of your neck. The overhead press in front of your neck is very, very not natural. For starters, let's just say that, when you're doing an overhead press, you need to ask yourself, did a caveman ever have to do this?
Right.
A caveman never had to vertically press. Vertically. Maybe, throw a rock forward, maybe pull something down, but literally to go right alongside your ear repeatedly. When, how, for what reason? I mean, our shoulder joint never had a reason to evolve to produce that movement, either from a skeletal standpoint nor from a muscular standpoint. That's number one.
Really good point.
Number two is that the most common cause of the most common injury is shoulder impingement syndrome.
Yes.
The most common cause of impingement syndrome is repeatedly moving your arm up alongside your head, right? And that happens because the humerus squeezes the tendon and the bursa in between the acromion process and the humerus. Now, that alone should tell us that the shoulder wasn't designed to move underneath that acromion over and over and over again, because it produces an injury, right? We would have evolved in a way to not produce that injury if that was supposed to be a sustainable activity over millennia, right? That's evidence number two. If you look at a shoulder joint from the side, if you look at not a but a deltoid muscle, and you say, well, here's the insertion of my deltoid, here's the origin of my deltoid. The quickest and simplest way to get my insertion toward my origin is to do a side raise, right? To directly move it in that direction. If you look at a ball and socket shoulder joint, you can see that smooth, cartilage of that surface is angling to one side, right? It's made to move that way. The ball is right here, right? If you take that ball, I wish I had a model of it. If you take that ball and then you rotate it, all of a sudden it's not moving along that same smooth pathway that it was moving when you did a straight side raise, right? It's clearly made to move as a lateral abduction movement. The joint is made to do that, right? It's not made to move. Like if you take the shoulder joint and then you rotate it and you make it do this instead of doing this, it's not meant to do this, right? It's also not meant to go up against the acromion process. But the simplest, most direct way to work the lateral deltoid is here. The simplest, most direct way to do the anterior deltoid is to the front. And the simplest way to work the rear deltoid is to the rear. None of those resemble an overhead press. Right. So, anybody on the simplest level would say, well, how can those be shoulder exercises and that also be a shoulder exercise? Because it looks completely different than those. Right. So we have distorted this. Years ago, circus performers, strongman acts needed to impress people in order to make a living and entertain. Right. So it makes sense that you would take something heavy and lift it upward. Well, if you're standing, upward means over your head. Right. So that's how the overhead press started. And the fact that you're using a bent lever instead of a straight lever means that you have less magnification. And the fact that your tricep is involved in your anterior deltoid, you've got three muscles involved, which means you can use more weight. But each participating muscle isn't necessarily loaded more than it would be if it was loaded by itself with less weight. Right. So you've got more weight, creating the illusion that each of the contributing muscles, the two deltoid muscles and the tricep muscle, are working harder, but they are not necessarily working harder, right? And we have this ego gratification. We compete with our buddies at the gym over and over, and we want bragging rights. We want to be able to say we did a 200-pound overhead press, right? But, that in and of itself means nothing to the deltoid itself, who says, I don't care how much you lifted. I didn't see how much you lifted. All I know is how much I'm moving and whether or not it's damaging my joint.
Let me just mention Robert Thompson. Then I have a question on that. Robert Thompson, thanks. Did overhead press with dumbbells yesterday, left shoulder tender. Now I know why. Glad I backed off. We'll save that movement for swimming, like you and the Mr. California, Doug.
Yeah. By the way, let me just say one more thing to Robert right there is when we do an overhead press, the amount of rotation, of external rotation of the humerus that each person can do varies, right? Some people can do more, some people can do less. But I encourage you, when you're in the gym, to look at people doing a seated dumbbell overhead press. Why do I say dumbbell? Because there isn't the issue of having to clear their head with the bar, right? When you're doing a bar, you have to bring it in front to clear your head. But when you're using dumbbells, you don't have to do that. You will still see that people's forearms are slanting slightly forward when they're in the bottom position. That means that they don't have enough shoulder mobility to rotate that arm externally enough to make that forearm go vertical, which would make it neutral from any forward falling or backward falling, right? That's what you would theoretically have to have. As long as you have a forward slant to that forearm, it now is a lever, just like it was on that side raise that we were talking about. It is now a rotational lever that wants to fall forward, and you have to reverse arm wrestle it to keep it from happening until you're going to strain the infraspinatus, which is the primary shoulder external rotation muscle. And worse, you're going to strain it from an angle that is the worst. if you stand right here, let me see if I can get here in front of the camera. I guess I'm right here. If you rotate like this, right, the infraspinatus comes around and ties into the front of the humeral head, and so when it rotates, it pulls the whole thing around, and it rotates back towards its origin, which is on the inside edge of the scapula, the shoulder blade, right? That's called mechanical advantage. That means it's pulling in the same direction you want the movement to go. But when you have your arm like this, you're trying to rotate it like this, but it's pulling from over there. It's still attached to the inside, so it cannot get underneath it and pull it like this, right? It's got to pull it from the side and create this kind of rotational movement like this. And so it has to produce 6, 7, 8 times more force. So if you're trying to do enough weight to load your deltoids, let's say you've got 50 pounds in each hand, even a slight forward tilt of that forearm is going to be magnified dramatically by the mechanical disadvantage of the angle of the upper arm bone to the infraspinatus. And so when people have shoulder pain from overhead presses, infraspinatus strain is one and impingement syndrome is another. And yet you're not improving the angle of load on the side deltoid. You're not improving the angle of load on the front deltoid. There's no advantage muscularly to doing that angle of shoulder joint movement rather than straight lateral abduction or forward, for the deltoids. And so there's no advantage, there's only disadvantage. Yes, you can lift more weight, but that just creates an illusion. That's like using a crowbar to lift a heavy weight.
Robert, you know what to do. Now you have to do it. Getting back to what I want to ask you with behind the neck. So everything you said, and we thank you. How about pull downs, obviously to the front versus to the back?
Okay, well,
I know you do the one arms now, but still.
Yeah. No, this is a good question. Briefly, let me just say that what I was talking about in terms of the overhead press and the forearm tilting slightly forward, because most people don't have enough mobility to go vertical, obviously going behind the neck requires more shoulder mobility, right? So that anything behind the neck, pull down behind the neck, overhead press behind the neck, anything requires so much external rotation of the humerus, you're straining the joint even without loading it. Loading it makes it worse, but that's way, way, way too much external. That's not a natural thing. We never had to evolve to have that much external rotation of that shoulder joint, humerus. Now, here's the thing is the ideal direction of resistance for the lats, right, is pulling, as for all the muscles, pulling toward their origins, right? Since the origin of lats are in the lower 2/3 of the spine and the bottom part of the pelvis, and the fibers go diagonal, right? Naturally, the movement would be diagonal and moving toward the origins, right?
Thus the one arm.
Thus the one arm. Okay, but when you're doing when you're doing two arms, you'll notice that that your hands are attached to the bar, which means they're going to be the same width at the top as they are at the bottom, right? But if you're angling your movement in, there's no way your hand has to be closer to the midline of the body when you finish than it was at the top, right? And so you're going to lose some of the range of motion when you're doing a two-arm pull down. If you're doing a two-arm pull in with the pulleys, yes, you can bring your shoulders in, but what you'll notice is the shoulder joint has a different comfort position in the arm up position and the arm down position. When you're in the up position, it's fine to do this, but when you pull down, you actually want to rotate toward it a little bit, right? You don't want to be out here because then you have excessive external rotation of the humerus. You want to angle yourself toward it a little bit. As you go up, you can go straight to the side if you want, but you can't go straight to the side when you're in the down position because you're going to externally rotate the shoulder too much. So it is true that a lat pull down to the front is better than a lat pull down to the rear. And it is true that a lat pull down is better than a chin up, in part because you can select the weight that's appropriate for you, and also because you can angle your torso in a way that allows you to pull in a slightly more backward direction than a straight downward direction, which would happen when you're doing chin ups. So those are all advantages of a pull down. But the disadvantage of a pull down is you get insufficient range of motion at the bottom, and you can't angle toward one side or the other as you would if you were doing single arm.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Especially, I'm sorry I wish I could have had a graphic up here. I'm not that technologically advanced. So the book's going really well. You mailed out a bunch last week.
Yeah, I've just gone through 100, and now I've just ordered my next 50. So
that's really good.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not the only source, right? Obviously, it's available on Amazon. It's available at the publisher, and Amazon is doing what it does when it sells books. It does the recommendations, right? So it's doing its algorithmic promotions, and then my publisher is doing his promotions through ACSM and everything else.
Hey, Doug, I'm gonna punch it in. Who's the publisher?
It's Healthy Learning.
Healthy. Is that online?
Yeah, healthylearning.com.
Okay, good.
https ://healthylearning.com.
I think if you put healthylearning.com and it'll just pop up. And also, what's your website? Because people can go there, right?
DougBrignole.com.
That's how you get it. DougBrignole.com. That's how you get it autographed. Robert has another question. What about squats where you need to rotate the arm to place the bar on the back? Shoulder seems tight. That is a big issue. Shoulder health, the squat properly. No, it really is, man.
Listen, this is just one more problem with the squat. That's why I'm laughing, is because I don't think people should be doing barbell squats at all. I really don't. The fact that it severely externally rotates your shoulder joint to hold on to the bar.
Doug, hold on. Were you sent here by Duranda by any chance? You know the story. When I was 16 years old, I went out to California. Yeah. I went into Duranda's gym, and he was a perfect guy, and I think I might have been drinking a little. He threw me out for asking a question. So I've always had this
eccentric, and that's putting it mildly.
But I know he was anti-squat and anti-bench. So
I heard your interview with Roger Collard.
Oh yeah, Roger.
And he was much less polite.
Roger was great. That was fun.
Yeah, Roger Collard obviously, was very outspoken about his dislike.
Yeah.
And that dislike of Vince Gironda is not entirely uncommon. He was very, very I don't know what you want to call him, cranky. I guess you could call him cranky. You could call him eccentric. What?
Did you train there?
No, I never met him. I never saw his gym.
Oh, okay. All right.
Look, I mean, the first time I ever saw him doing a sissy squat, he was a very skinny guy, right? His physique was very thin, right? He was not massive by any stretch of the imagination. And so I was very young when I saw pictures of him. I was 16, 17, 18 years old, and I saw him recommending sissy squats. And, before I knew biomechanics, I would have thought, well, if you do sissy squats, you'll get skinny legs like him. But now that I'm older, and now that I'm wiser, now that I'm more educated, and I understand the mechanics, if there was one thing he said right, was that sissy squats are better than squats. But, what I want to emphasize here is that anytime you involve hip extension muscles and knee extension muscles at the same time, you're going to get reciprocal innervation. You're going to get a shutting off of the rectus femoris, which is 25% of your quadricep. And you're going to compromise hip extension because your hamstring is being shut off by the activation of the quadricep. So any kind of, even a cable squat, even a Brignole cable squat, is going to cause a degree of neurological interference. So that's why it's better to separate those two joint functions. Separate from that, your quadricep needs one direction of resistance and your glutes need a different direction of resistance. So when you're using one direction of resistance for both muscles, they both end up working half as much as they could. They both end up getting a reduction of the load magnification from lever mechanics. And as a result of that, you have to put more weight on your back, which compresses your spine. And that's just plain foolish. You can load your glutes significantly more with a hip extension machine without putting anything on your spine. And you can load your quads significantly more without putting anything on your spine. So it doesn't make any sense that you would settle for a compromised load on your quadriceps and on your glutes and accept that spinal compression just because you think that lifting more weight or an impressive amount of weight, or because it's tradition, or because it's compound, or because whatever you want to call it, because it's dogma. That makes no sense whatsoever. Not logical, scientific sense.
Doug, that's being said, over your history and course of training for many, many years, let's say maybe your philosophy differed many years ago. Do you think you could attribute your, I know you had some spinal issues and surgery, you had some compression
that
weren't the best for you.
You cut out there for a second, but I think I got what you were saying. Look, it might be easy for some people to say that, Doug Brignole had a great physique because he used to do those compound exercises. Well, first of all, that's not entirely true. I never did bent over barbell rows. I always hated it. I always thought this is such a stupid exercise. I don't feel this at all. I mean, I felt one-arm dumbbell rows better than bent over barbell rows without loading my lower back like you do on bent over barbell rows. But even bent over barbell rows isn't as specific as a pull-in is. So number one, I didn't do deadlifts. I never did bent over barbell rows. I basically never did upright rows. I maybe did incline presses for a while, overhead presses for a while, but the farther I got along in my career, and I was still, in 1991 when I was getting ready for Northwestern Mr. America, Mr. Universe. By that time, I'd already switched off of a lot of those compound exercises. I was doing a lot of isolation exercises. And even now, I mean, there's just no comparison. There really is no comparison. I can put you through a workout of isolation exercises where you would have a hard time walking afterwards.
Wow.
And at the same time that you can't walk, you feel nothing on your spine.
Wow.
No sense of being hit by a truck, no sense of wear and tear on your joints, and yet your legs are jello. I mean, there's same thing with pecs, same thing. I mean, it's just once you do this and once you dial in the form and once you get familiar with the movements, I mean, if I do decline dumbbell press and that's all I do for I get the very, very best chest workout, chest pump ever. Better than butterfly machine, better than incline presses, better than dips.
Wow.
Far, far better than anything like that ever. And it's only one exercise because it's very, very specific.
Doug, how do people come on your webinar that you mentioned? You have a webinar?
I don't have an ongoing webinar.
Yeah.
I do an online certification with my partner, Mo Larby, who just chimed in there for a second ago. We operate under Smart Training 365, and we do an online certification course. And we have a variety of videos, the Break 20 videos, a 10-part webinar series. We do trainer certification, and we're constantly adding content, right? So there's a private Facebook page so people can get on there. They can compare notes with other members that have gone through the Pro program. We've got some great, Mike Soto was one of them. He just chimed in there. Yes. We're all becoming kind of a family where we're speaking the same language. We say opposite position loading. We say, improper alignment. We know the language, right? We know what we're talking about. And so it's a great course. smarttraining365.com is how you get there. Any webinar that I do is going to be.
I'm sorry, Doug. What was that again? .com?
Smart Training 365.
Okay. 365.com. Good.
So, I'm very busy. I'm trying to work on an academic book now. I've been invited to co-author a university book on biomechanics.
Wow.
And I really want to do that because I think it'll really legitimize what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's not just a bodybuilder's book. It's, if this stuff is taught in academia, it totally legitimizes it. So
I don't think any other bodybuilder has ever done that.
I'm very honored to have been invited. And so I'm working on it right now. And so I try to minimize the amount of one-on-one that I'm doing. And for that reason, I work with Mo and Smart Training 365 because he has a little bit more facility in interacting with people and helping them get the courses and answering their questions and things like that. So we're working, hand in hand here. I'm trying to get as many people answered as possible without jeopardizing my other projects.
Well, you do us a real solid coming here because I so value this because this, if you want to talk monetarily, this is almost invaluable. And really, people don't have access to you or this type of information hardly anywhere. Robert Thompson, you're 66. You're young, man, and you're aware you need to do something with your joints, but must stay strong. He's going to get your book, and if you order it from Doug, Robert, from DougBrignole.com, he'll sign it and write something in it for you. So that's a cool thing too.
Yeah. And I can ship it anywhere too. I've got some people that have ordered it from Australia, the UK, Ireland, Canada.
Don't you get hammered on the mailing costs?
Well, it's $43 international, and that's by way of the United States Postal Service, by the way.
Oh,
So the United States Postal Service basically delivers it to the post office of that country.
Okay.
And then they take it the rest of the way, right? So I don't exactly know what happens once it gets there, but I just had someone ordered from Mexico,
Wow.
and they said I don't want it to come by way of USPS because our mail service here isn't good.
Is not good.
Is not good. And so they wanted to pay the extra money. In Mexico, I priced it out at $75 by way of FedEx.
Wow.
Now, you know, if you go to the UK by way of FedEx, it's like $168.
Wow.
Right. So it depends. And in South Africa right now is literally prohibiting any shipments from USPS, quote unquote, because of COVID concerns. However, they're allowing FedEx to bring packages. So now that's the problem. So $168 to South Africa by way of FedEx versus $43.
Doug, that's when science seems to be negotiable with these folks.
Yeah.
know?
Well, you know, we do the best we can. I mean, obviously the cost of shipping is out of my hands.
Right. Right.
But you know, we do the best we can to find the best price for shipping.
Well, the value is obviously, you know, well beyond that. So people really want it. I got it.
That's true. I mean, if you added it all together, you said, okay, fine, $168 plus the $70 for the book. I'm getting a lifetime of better, you know, results and saving my joints. Isn't that worth a few $100s or a couple $100s?
You know, who knows? If you don't have health insurance, it could save you $250,000 if you blow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not even being flippant about that, because as you get older, all those things you see and read about and hear about when you're young and you're invincible. You know, I'm 57 now, and you know, listen.
I mean, there was a guy at the gym who said to me, "I can't train heavy anymore." He says, "What about you?" And I said, "If you do the right exercises, you can train heavy. If you do the wrong exercises, you can't." I mean, when I do triceps and I do pecs and I do biceps and I use as heavy a weight as I can, as it limits me to 4 reps. That's called heavy. When you can't do more than 4 reps, that's called heavy, regardless of what you're actually lifting.
You know, Doug, Doug, Jack LaLanne said, the reason a man at age 60 can't do the same things he did at age 20 is because somewhere along the line, somebody stepped in and said, it's time to get serious about life and give up that gym and all that stuff. And they stop doing it, and they gain rust and they become decrepit. But if you take care of yourself throughout, and I'm paraphrasing here now, and you know, you stay within the confines of what you can do and your goals are clear, you should be able to do the same things when you're 60 as you did at 20. I mean, look,
if you had an injury that is seriously compromising movement,
right,
then even a good movement will be difficult for you because your joints just don't move the way a normal joint moves.
Your architecture no longer allows it.
If you've got scar tissue, if you've got, you know, some kind of pins or plates, or, you know, if you've got let's say a fused spine, you will not be able to do ab crunches. You will not be able to move your spine the way spines typically move. Right?
Well, then you got my member Mike Fees that I mentioned earlier, and he has cerebral palsy. So
yeah, I mean, you know, we have to work around our issues. You know, when I talk about a particular movement being really, really good, I'm talking about it being really, really good for a person who isn't compromised.
Right.
I can't address all the different kinds of compromises that exist out there because there's thousands of them, right? And I can't speak to each. And then you're talking about personal training or personal consultation. But the movements that I recommend in my book and that we recommend in our course, you know, are the most natural movements for an uninjured person to do. Right now, you might be one of those people that have less pain doing some convoluted movement than the more perfect movement. Well, that's the exception to the rule. Right. I mean, shoulder joints typically move more in a decline direction than an incline direction. Period. We evolved to function that way.
Right.
That's undeniable.
There's always going to be somebody to try to prove you wrong. Hey, Doug, I want to really thank you. We had a lot of great questions here. I'll have you back on if you will. You know,
I love doing it.
And
by the way, I'm going to be writing for Lee Labrada's newsletter now.
Oh wow!
I used to do that a while back, and he had a change of staff, and so I think the person who was coordinating that went away. Now Tom Dieters used to be the editor-in-chief of Muscle and Fitness.
Oh yeah, of course, yes.
Well, Tom Dieters is now managing Lee Labrada's newsletter.
I was wondering what he was doing. He used to publish both chiropractors, so we had that kinship.
He's a great guy. He's a great guy.
He slipped my stuff into muscle and fit, well, muscle build, muscle. It wasn't muscle builder, it was muscle fitness. He really is.
All right. So now I'm dealing with him, and
Wow.
And they're going to do weekly newsletters.
Wow.
It's called the Lean Body Newsletter.
I love it.
And I don't know if I can kick out an article a week, but I can certainly kick out an article a month, maybe every 3 weeks. So, so you'll see some of my stuff on Lee Labrada.
Well, he definitely very high caliber himself. And I want to say this about Lee Labrada. In my opinion, he is probably the person who is closest in human history, from what I've seen, to almost perfect symmetry. And you know what symmetry is, because everybody uses that word. They're not usually referencing symmetry. They're usually talking about proportion, because Frank Zane will even tell you he has poor symmetry. He would, angle his body so you couldn't pick up on it. But Labrada could stand there almost, point blank, and you really couldn't. Very close. Yeah.
And see, the problem that he had, unfortunately, was that because he was short in stature,
right?
He couldn't overshadow the bigger guy, even with perfect symmetry.
No. What do you think about his son? He won the Nationals.
Looks like massive.
Yeah, he really
is massive. Yeah.
He looks like he could be top 5 Olympia.
Yeah. He's fantastic, and he's a good kid.
Yeah, remarkable.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, usually it's like business. When the kids take over the business, they screw it up.
Yeah.
But
Bill Pearl's son didn't even bodybuild. He said to me, "I can never be better than my dad." Phil was his name. Phil told me I can never be better than my dad, so I'm not even going to start.
That's good.
Yeah, but what I was going to say was, Lee Labrada has a background in engineering.
Yes, correct.
He endorsed my book.
Wow.
He said, everything you're saying from an engineering standpoint is 100% correct.
Wow, powerful.
Yeah.
Nice guy, it seems. Robert Thompson has another. I know this is off topic, but any advice on HITT, I mix it up with HIT Mill X, treadmill, rower, VersaClimber, and SKIERG. Let me just post this. Fortunately, I'm not injured or compromised. Does that make any sense to you, Doug?
Look, when you're doing HIT training, TT, you're talking mostly about cardiovascular. And when you're talking about cardiovascular, you're talking about something that is related to your heart and lungs, never mind what's causing it to happen, right? So whether you're doing this kind of thing, or whether you're running, whether you're jumping rope, whether you're swimming, whatever is causing your heart and lungs to work, almost doesn't matter, other than, the skeletal implications of that, depending on injuries or whatever. But it's proven that high intensity, low intensity interval training back and forth is more productive cardiovascularly, both from a performance standpoint and also from a health standpoint, than doing long, slow, steady intensity, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're talking about body fat loss, what matters more is your metabolic rate. And there's a more significant elevation in metabolism the higher your heart rate goes, but it doesn't have to stay up there. So you can get your heart rate way up on a sprint, and then you can let it come down for a minute or two, and then sprint again, and then come down for a minute or two. And that super high elevated heart rate is going to create more metabolic stimulation than just the slow, steady, long distance. And you're going to get also more cardiovascular health benefits, and more performance benefits. So yes, in general, high intensity, low intensity interval training is better than long, slow. So this is what you do to get there depends on what your shoulders feel like, what your knees feel like, what your elbows feel like.
Robert, always maintain the goal. If the goal is clear, you'll know what to do, or you'll find out what to do.
Right.
And thanks for your input tonight. You gave us a lot of good questions. And
thank you, Robert.
We appreciate it. And at 66, I salute you, because again, people at 36 now look like they've thrown in the towel, or maybe even
exactly right.
So all I can say is keep going. But Doug, I want to thank you. Thanks again. I know you're already successful, but you got a lot more success coming. Working with Labrada, that's really cool, especially since everything is online now. There's no more tangible magazines.
Right. Let me just say one last thing. So let's keep our fingers crossed, right? We're hoping to have me take over Rick Drayson's show.
Oh, talk about that a little bit. So you were a guest on Rick's Corner 30 times or more. Probably maybe
more than 30. Yeah.
Second to what's his name?
Rich Piana.
Oh, Rich Piana, right. So is that in the works? Are you
and then Jerry Brainham was on there I don't know how many times he was on there, not quite as many as me. He had a harder time getting there. You know, Rick used to live in the Valley, so it was harder to get there. But I was there 30, 40 times. And I think what made it work for us was that, you know, rather than just answering questions, which is what typically happens when you interview someone, you know, we had so much history together and we had such a interesting chemistry and dynamic that we would banter and we would make jokes, you know, and so he would throw a punch, I would throw a punch. And so we would tease each other. And I tend to be a little bit animated. And so that's entertaining. And so a lot of people said, well, you should take over the show. At first, I thought it was sort of silly. And then I thought, well, you know, I could easily be just the host. I wouldn't want to change the name. It would be Rick's Corner. I would say, hi, welcome to Rick's Corner. I'm your host, Doug Brignole. And today
it's already the brand, and it's got a very big following, and people know it.
And I could easily, I know a lot of the same people. I could easily bring Boyer Coe. I can bring Chris Dickerson. I could bring a lot of people that Steve Davis has already offered to be on it. I certainly would have Jerry Branham on there frequently, you know, because people want to know about nutrition, and there's nobody better about nutrition and biochemistry than him.
Jerry's great.
So, yeah, and he's a great guy, and he's fun to talk to. And so, you know, it would have the same feel it had before. I mean, I even thought about having like a cardboard cutout of Rick, you know, and then every once in a while throwing a joke toward him.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, but, you know, I wanted to feel like it's still Rick's show.
In marketing or being a conduit of information, one of the most important things is never be boring. So even if it's not great information, at least be entertaining to a certain degree. I have to ask you, because I can't find him anywhere. If you get a chance, if you would do me a solid, just shoot Boyer Coe a little message. I'd like to get him on here. Okay. And I've seen him on other things. He seems pretty, you know.
He's a very nice guy.
Yeah, very nice. I've talked to him many years ago. He's a very gentleman. My friend Lance Stranahan, who's a pretty big figure down south. His father was he was a PGA Tour. His father, Frank Stranahan, was the guy. When he was a kid, his father knew all these guys, so he stayed with Joe Weider, Mike Menser. He stayed over Boyer Coe's house when he was the nicest gentleman, very forthright.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he stays in great shape all the time.
Still,
he came to. I have a picture of him with him taken at my gym, probably 1985 or 4 or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, so, and I met him through Bill Pearl years ago, and
is he
I'll see if I can contact him.
Is he back in Louisiana now? Is he?
No, I think he's in Southern California.
Oh, he is? Okay.
I think he's in Southern California. He's in the insurance business, so he's got, and I always admire that when somebody, has a career outside of the bodybuilding career.
Yes. Yeah, he was in.
Pat Nevey had a fantastic car business.
Yeah, very big. Yes.
Boyer,
what did you say? Boyer was in insurance.
Insurance business, yeah.
Yeah. I knew he was.
I'm not sure if it's car insurance or health insurance or life insurance, but he's pretty self-made.
If you mention my podcast, just tell him I had him winning the 80 Olympia. So,
okay.
To beat a dead horse. Some people are tired.
Yeah, right.
I wasn't there, so the funny thing was, right after that show, my mentor who trained me here in Connecticut, Frank Salentano, he owned a gym, and he brought in succession, Cal Scalick, Dennis Tenorino, Boyer Coe, and I think Lance Dreher. Tenorino had just competed in the Olympia. He literally came to our gym. He was in shape, and every one of those guys all said, I'm just reiterating what they said. I was only 17. They said, none of us are going in it next year because Franco's going to win.
It was the rumor was, right?
Yeah. Well, this is just, these are just words. I wasn't there. I mean, it's just,
Yeah, right.
It doesn't matter.
Well, I've seen the pictures you've seen, right? Him standing next to Padilla and standing next to the other guys, and it's like, oh, come on, please.
Listen, Roy Callender is going to be on next week, but it could have been Callender. Yeah, Callender, Padilla, or Platts. I can never see Dickerson. I don't know. I guess I'd have to see him in person.
Yeah, Platts was fantastic that year.
Yes. Oh yeah, very, very. And
Yeah.
Did you happen to see the video of him recently of the leg extension? Speaking of leg extensions,
yeah.
Unreal. And he's 65.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
He's still got those massive quads, and they're still ripped.
Yeah, and he still has that tenacity. You can just feel it.
Well, look, here's the thing is, there's no doubt that he had genetics for muscular legs.
Right.
I mean, come on. It's like people say they try to attribute his leg development to squats. Well, there's been lots and lots of people that have squatted that never had Tom Platz's legs.
That's correct.
Right. So you cannot say only. I mean, I'm not saying squats didn't contribute. I mean, any kind of load to the quads is going to cause stimulation. But when you combine that with fantastic genetics for quad growth, it's insane, right? He had insane quads. But the other thing I was going to say too is, he was known for his intensity.
Yes.
And to this day, the primary message from Tom Platz in terms of training is intensity, right? Well, I'm sorry, but there's other things besides intensity, and there's such a thing as too much intensity.
Well, John Defend is a friend and been on the show a lot of times. You know, John.
Yeah, of course.
So, some years ago, Flex Magazine had a list of the top 10 hardest, most intense trainers ever, and I'll just make it skeletal there. Number 4 was John Defendis, but number 1 was Tom Platz as the old. Yeah. I mean, how do you mensurate that? I'm not sure, but
I remember, when what was his name? What was John Defendis' mentor's name?
Mihalik.
Yeah, Steve Mihalik.
Yeah.
I mean, people would talk about, the insanity, the number of sets, the amount of volume, the number of reps.
Yeah.
There was a time when I thought I actually drew a circle and I put the Mr. California name right in the center. And I put, all of our names, my name and my other various competitors that I was aware of on the out. And I said to myself, assuming we're all equally distant from the center, the person who trains the hardest will get there first.
I like that.
Well, that's false. That's false.
That's
false. Not true. It's false because, first of all, it excludes genetics.
Right.
Right. And it also excludes the fact that overtraining is real.
Yes.
You can do, if I wanted to do 100 sets for a body part in a workout, it wouldn't benefit me.
No.
Right. It would be more than the guy who's doing 20 or 30.
Right.
Right. But it wouldn't be better. It would be worse.
But you didn't know that back then.
No, and obviously, to some degree, it's almost impossible to do 100 sets. But literally what we would all do back then is we would go until we would drop.
Yes.
We would train with so much intensity, we couldn't move our arms. We couldn't move our legs. I mean, we would just drop, right? But that isn't necessarily the most efficient way to train. After a while, you realize you can get more benefit with less effort. And something in our psyche tells us it can't be that easy. Right? It can't be that less effort is better. It's got to be that the most amount of effort you can do is better. No, that's actually not physiologically true.
Yeah, Mihalik tried to drown Defendis to find out how much he wanted to breed, which had to be in line with his desire to win the USA. He pulled over the water. It's crazy. He told me a lot of crazy stories.
I mean, we've all heard stories of people who bragged about having to vomit after a leg workout.
Yeah, I still hear that.
They come home and they tell their wife, "Hey, baby, I came home and I vomited today." And it's like, that's a good thing. Yeah, that's really great. Well, it's like, no, not necessarily.
You're trying to attract people to do something healthy, and when you tell them things like that,
but there's a mentality there's a percentage out there of people that have a mentality that think more is better. That crazy is good.
Yes.
Right, and I disagree.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting.
And it can be counterproductive.
Oh, it could be damaging, not only to you but to the people around you. You don't want to be that guy who ends up alone on a Sunday night, a broken man in a dank diner with his head hanging down. He has nowhere to go. What happened? I worked so hard. And
by the way, not to name any names, but there are some people that are former Mr. Olympia winners, that are former, Mr. Universe winners, that, are just living on some kind of hourly job right now if they're even able to make a living.
They're broken. Yeah.
Set aside from all the orthopedic issues they have, so we really do need to conduct our life with balance, some degree of balance, and I mean, Bob Gruskin, bless his soul, right? He told me when I was 17 years old, get your education, go to school. Very, very few bodybuilders ever make a living doing bodybuilding. Don't rely on this.
No, and especially now, the genetic pool is so large now too, as far as how many people are engaged in it. And it's, you remember in the 70s, if you trained, you were weird. Why are you doing that? You were ostracized. You were a pariah, whatever, now.
I mean, I know people that, they're struggling to work as a trainer, and they're, in their 70s, and they're former Mr. Universe. I mean, that was I don't know if you remember in Pumping Iron, they didn't fail to miss the opportunity of mentioning that he was Ed Corney, former Mr. Universe, going back to his bouncer job at the nightclub.
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
They kind of just touched upon that, but especially in the book, that not so much the movie, but more so the book really got into that as far as, he was more or less a doorman. I know I heard he owned a bar. He may have at one time, but you want to make sure
you're covering your bases. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a full life. You don't drag anybody down with you. You're happy. You have some value, some utility. You're helping people in your sphere of influence, which you do, Doug. And I want to thank you because I have you here now, and it's always, it's almost surreal getting to talk to you and other guys like you, because here you are right now. We're sharing this information, and I read about you for years and years and years. And I'm happy that you exist and that you're a good guy. And you produce really useful information. I sense a little frustration in us both, perhaps, because not enough people will get it. And even if they get it, they probably won't embrace it.
Oh, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink it, right? You can present the information, and I just have to not care about the people that will refute it or just push it away. It's all right. My job isn't to convince everyone. My job is just to get the information out there. You
must care and worry so little that you traverse the tangent of irresponsibility, but you don't quite go there. So you still take care of it, but you don't worry. Why worry about something? Because when it comes, you're going to worry the second time. So you just do what you do. You make no apology. You put the information out there. It's not for everyone. There's going to be people who attack you. I mean, for whatever reason. You've told me 4 things tonight that are totally contrarian to what I've always adhered to. And you're right. So, but it's not a problem. I just stopped doing it now. Do it a little better. But Doug, I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody that was here.
Thank you.
And hey, good luck with the book. I put all your info here. So once again, if they want to get an autographed copy, where do they go?
DougBrignole.com or healthylearning.com or Amazon.com. And if you get your book from Amazon, leave a nice comment.
Oh, definitely leave a comment. Gennaro Ferrara, I have to mention, because this guy is shredded. I put him up. I don't know if you saw him.
I saw his back. He's fantastic back.
Yeah. He just said, and just because you're doing 50 sets, that doesn't mean you're training hard. You can train like a beast and smart with less sets. But honestly, 20 sets minimum for back is necessary for a beginner, and for legs, you need at least 24 sets. But I'm talking from experience. A skinny ectomorphic teen at 18 who started at a body weight of 150 pounds at 57. That sounds like me right now. That's a lot of information.
Well, I started as a skinny ectomorph at 111 pounds.
Oh, you started really light. He said, actually, a correction, 135 pounds. Haha, I meant. Hey, Gennaro, come on my next podcast, because we need your input. But we got to go right now because I don't know what's going on inside the house right now. I got to get out there. And
the dogs are going crazy.
Who knows? They're probably going to attack me. I already got bit twice by one dog in the same house here. So
oh my gosh,
it's unreal. But thanks again, Doug. It really does mean well to speak to you. The people love it, and keep punching, man.
Okay, thank you all, guys. I'll see you next time.
Have a great